He placed the man whom he had formed. And before it was men, now this is man. All right, now we'll discuss that later, but so he puts him in the Garden of Eden, and all the trees that were beautiful and good for food, as well as the tree of life in the center of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And a lake also sprang up in Eden to supply the garden with water, and from there it divided and became 4 sources. And the name of the first was the Pishon, and it flows along the land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold in that land is pure, and there is bdellium and onyx. And the second river was Gihon, and flows along the land of Cush. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, which flows through east of Asher. And the fourth river is the Phrath. The ever-living God then took man, placed him in the Garden of Eden for the purpose of cultivating and taking care of it. The Lord God instructed the man, saying, for food you may eat of the whole trees of the garden, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. Because in the day you eat from it, dying, you shall die. In the day that you eat from it, dying, you shall die. And the ever-living God also said, it is not good for the man to be in solitude. I will make for him a comforter. I will make for him a comforter to live with him. Therefore, the ever-living God, who formed out of the ground every animal of the field, as well as every bird of the skies, took them to the man to see what he would name them. So allowed the man to name the animals. And whatever the man with a living soul called them, that was their name. So the man gave names to all the quadrupeds and all the birds of the sky and all the wild animals, but it was no comfort to the man to name them. He's looking for a wife, okay? So the ever-living God threw the man into a stupor, and he slept. And he, taking one of his ribs, he closed up the flesh in its place, and from the rib which the ever-living God had taken out of the man, he constructed a woman and brought her to the man, and said, this form is bone of my own bone and flesh of my own flesh. This is what the man said, by the way. Flesh of my own flesh. This shall be named woman, because she is taken from man. Man shall therefore leave his father and mother, and shall unite with his wife, and they shall be one body. And they were naked, the man and his wife, but they were not ashamed. We're going to stop there, but we're going to talk about this section. This was written by totally different people than wrote the first story. And what happened in the ages that passed is there were this group of people called the redactors. This is an historical fact. What the redactors did was they took the separate stories that the Hebrew people had, and they redacted them. They put them together. Some things were eliminated, some things were kept, and they just kind of molded them together. So the story you have here about creation is different than the first story because it was written by different people. Especially this section about man. Now, obviously there's a conflict here. Because look, here's what we got. We've got men being created in the image of God, and then you have a man being created out of the dust, and then a woman being taken from his rib. And in that story, it seems like this particular man is different. And this is how the Hebrews handled this contradiction throughout the ages. They're saying that Adam is actually the first chosen of God. That Adam is the first chosen. In other words, the first Hebrew, for all intents and purposes. And all these other men, those are just, those are the other men out there. They are not the same. Actually, they have treated this in a way that says those aren't the same, right? Adam's the first Hebrew, and those that descend from him become the tribes of Israel. And the others are the alien others. But that's really not what the story intended in the first place. So here we have a picture that really produced the patriarchal society. Reflected, I'll say reflected, because it was already, this particular society was already patriarchal. And what this does, it relegates women to the second place position and to be, hey, look, it's your job to be the comforter. I mean, this is kind of how it's presented. Let's just say this. I like the idea the first idea of men being made, constituted male and female in the image of God. That's interesting too, to let your mind go with that imagery. But so I guess what that would mean is that all the characteristics exist in God. In any event, we're going to talk about the temptation of the woman. By the way, if nobody told you that today, it's your fault. It's a woman's fault, all these problems, everything that's happened, direct result of the temptation of Eve, which we will talk about next week. Thank you very much.